Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and first I'd like to say to all the new subscribers to the channel, hello and welcome to my channel, welcome to my little piece of YouTube. I'm Inquisitor Vaughn and I like to make videos talking about Warhammer 40k. Thank you for subscribing and thank you for watching, and that goes to everyone who subscribed to my channel and who was watching my videos. I really appreciate it. I want to talk about something in Warhammer 40k lore called the Cursed Founding, one of the most mysterious Space Marine foundings in Warhammer 40k lore, and I want to talk about it for a few reasons. The most recent Space Marine founding to have happened in Warhammer 40k lore is the Ultima founding. It's the founding that introduced the Primaris Marines to the 40k universe and dozens of brand new chapters, all completely made of Primaris Marines. The Primaris Marines are a new type of Space Marine that took the Tech Priest Belisarius' Call 10,000 years to create and perfect. They are larger, stronger, and faster than the Space Marines made before them, and their gene seeds are more stable, making them less susceptible to corruption by chaos and mutation. But again, this project took 10,000 years to perfect. The question is, how did Belisarius' Call succeed in creating the Primaris Marines? Looking through the lore for Space Marines, there is one founding that might have the answers to this question. The founding is called the 21st Founding, also known as the Cursed Founding. It is known as the Cursed Founding because in their attempt to fix the flaws in gene seed and create better Space Marines, the Janitors of the Adeptus Mechanicus ended up creating chapters with even more flaws than they had previously. These flaws would see some of these Space Marine chapters hunted and destroyed by the forces of the Inquisition. Some would turn traitor or to chaos, and others were shunned and isolated due to their cursed reputation. Interestingly enough, some of these chapters are listed as having received Primaris Marines. As time goes on, the Cursed Founding is regulated into the realm of myth and conjecture. Despite this, the chapters that are said to have been created from it still suffer under their origin story. In this video series, I want to talk about the Cursed Founding because I have a few theories. The first theory is that the Cursed Founding never happened, and the second theory is that some, if not all of the chapters said to have been cursed, are not cursed at all. In this video series, in this first video for the series, I will go over the Cursed Founding, its lore, and its story. In the second video, I will go over the mysteries of Inculaba, which is where the Cursed Founding was said to happen, looking at the lore with a critical eye. Following that, I will be looking into each of the chapters said to have been created in the Cursed Founding to determine whether or not they were actually cursed and to speculate a little bit about their lore. But without further delay, let's get into it. Generally speaking, Space Marine foundings are when new Space Marine chapters are created in the Warhammer 40k universe. After the events of the Horus Heresy, the Primarch Rabute Guilliman divided most of the remaining Loyalist legions into chapters. Each chapter would have a standard of 1,000 Marines, and one of the chapters would keep the original legion's name. For example, the Imperial Fist's Legion would be divided into the Imperial Fist chapter, the Black Templars chapter, and a few others. The Blood Angels Legion would be divided into the Blood Angels chapter, the Flesh Tearers chapter, and a few others, and so on. The chapters that kept their old legion name would be known as First Founding chapters, and the other chapters created from the old legion were known as Second Founding chapters. Since the division of the old legions into chapters, new chapters have been created in events called foundings. Foundings usually happen when the High Lords of Terra determine that the Imperium needs more Space Marines to defend it. When this is determined, the Janitors of the Adeptus Mechanicus go about creating new Space Marine chapters. Every chapter that has been made since the first founding has had to submit a gene seed tithe to the Adeptus Mechanicus, usually 5% of the gene seed in a chapter. They have to submit this to the Mechanicus for two reasons. The first is to test the gene seed for signs of any degradation, mutation, or flaws. Some of the Loyalist Legion gene seed had developed flaws over time, and so they had to be monitored to see if they were still within acceptable parameters of deviation. The second reason is that if a founding is announced by the High Lords of Terra, the Adeptus Mechanicus will use those gene seed tithes to create new chapters. These chapters are called successor chapters. Most of the time, successor chapters are made from the first founding chapter's gene seed tithe, those chapters who still bear the old legion's name. But every now and then, a successor chapter will be honored with their own successor chapters. For example, the Executioners are successors of the Imperial Fists. The Iron Champions are successors of the Executioners, meaning that the Iron Champions were made using the Executioner's gene seed tithe instead of the Imperial Fist tithe. Some of you might be asking yourself, like, why does this really matter? It matters to the chapters who are created because there is pride in descending from one of the Primarchs, and knowing their gene seed lineage makes them a part of a brotherhood of shared lineage that might be advantageous when they need allies in war. It's important for the Adeptus Mechanicus so that they can determine where a chapter's gene seed comes from if it was ever in question. For example, the Imperial Fists lost the ability to produce a couple of organs. They lost the ability to produce a functional Betcher's gland, which allows them to spit acid, and the Susan membrane, which allows them to sustain themselves in temporary hibernation. If the Adeptus Mechanicus received a mystery gene seed tithe and they found that it couldn't produce a functional Betcher's gland and a Susan membrane, they could conclude with a few more tests that the gene seed was of Imperial Fist gene seed lineage. In the over 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy, there have been many foundings and hundreds of Space Marine chapters brought into existence. The most recent founding to happen in the 40k lore has been the Ultima founding. Remember those flaws I was talking about earlier? Well, apparently, Rabute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, was worried about them too. When Rabute became Lord Commander of the Imperium, and after he divided the Loyalist legions into chapters, he tasked Belisarius Cawl, a priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus, with getting rid of the flaws in the existing gene seed so that more stable Space Marines could be made. He gave Belisarius Cawl a device called the Sancprimus Portum, which held the genetic information of each of the Primarchs to help him to stabilize the existing gene seed. However, there were a couple of problems. The first problem was Guilliman would be put into stasis after getting grievously wounded, and so Belisarius Cawl was free to interpret the parameters of this task to his mechanical heart's content. He would spend the next 10,000 years working at this assignment, and finally he would create the Primaris Marines, Space Marines who had far more stable gene seed organs, who had 3 additional organs, and who were closer in design to their Primarchs than the Marines that existed previously. Rabute Guilliman was brought out of stasis in the 41st millennium and was shown the Primaris Marines, and he was pleased with them. The Ultima founding was announced and dozens of new chapters were created, all of which were Primaris, made from these new Space Marine warriors. But the second problem was that the Imperium had become far more superstitious than what it had been during the Great Crusade, when the Emperor himself was walking around being awesome. The Imperium went from abiding by the secular, rationalist, science-driven imperial truth to becoming emperor worshippers of the imperial cult. The Mechanicus as an organization had always been a mystical and cultist organization, being centered around a religion that revered something called the machine spirit. Combine the state of the Imperium with the nature of the Mechanicus, and you are bound to have some misinterpretations of ideas like purity and stability. So the Primaris Marines were made, and the Ultima founding happened, and less flawed Space Marines were brought into existence. Great. But the process to create these Marines took thousands of years. There was, reasonably, a lot of trial and error. One such trial and error was the 21st Cursed founding that happened in the 36th millennium. Before we go a little bit more into the Cursed founding, there is one more piece of information that needs to be understood about the Space Marine foundings, and it is the role that the Mechanicus plays in creating Space Marine chapters. As said before, the Mechanicus demands a tithe of gene seed from all chapters to check for gene seed purity and to collect in case of a new founding. The figures responsible for this process are called janitors. Janitors are high-ranking priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus who are interested in biological organisms rather than machines. Regardless of their interest, they still regard the subject of their study as they would machines, viewing organic life forms as biomechanical and studying them with the same cold logic as any priest of the Mechanicus would study a machine. Being that this is their focus, they are the ones in charge of checking Space Marine gene seed for flaws. Many janitors lack the mechanical augmentations that most priests of the machine cult have. They appear to have more skin, more muscles, and appear to be more human. More times than not, however, the muscles that they have are vat grown. Their skin is modified to be tougher, and their organic form is just as manipulated as their more mechanical brethren. I know that was a lot of information, but now you know what a Space Marine founding is, you know a bit about the history of foundings, you know about gene seed types, and you know about janitors. Now you know just about everything that you need to know in order to understand what made the cursed founding so unique. According to available information, the 21st founding was the first known attempt at ridding the gene seed flaws from Space Marine chapters and creating more Primarch-like Astartes. The 21st founding is known as the Cursed Founding because it is thought to have been a catastrophic failure that produced chapters with even more flaws than what existed previously. 7 chapters were listed as having been created during the Cursed Founding. One thing that I haven't seen anyone else who covered the topic of the Cursed Founding point out is that all information that we have about the Cursed Founding is in the context of hindsight. Anyone who didn't have a direct role in the founding never knew that it actually happened. It was only discovered to have happened much later in time. The story goes that in 998 M41, an explorer team led by the Magos Marcus Peronis would discover the dead world of Inculaba. Initiating an archaeological expedition of the world, they discovered it to have been the site of a long-lost Adeptus Mechanicus Geno laboratory. Inquiring further, the team would discover that the Dead World was the location where a secret project was initiated. This secret project was called the Homo sapiens Novus Project, the New Man Project. Uncovering data left in the facility as well as video logs, they were able to uncover that the Homo sapiens Novus Project's focus was to attempt at ridding the existing Space Marine gene seed of their flaws and the creation of Primarch-like Marines. However, experimentation toward doing this would lead to tragic results as video feeds would show horrific degradation of the subjects made during this time. Researching further, information was found stating that the project began in 991 M35 and that the goal of the project was to attempt to create Primarch-like Astartes that would be more stable and lack the flaws that many Astartes had at the time. The project would come to an abrupt end at an unknown date when one of the subjects, already corrupted by the powers of chaos, would send a signal into the warp alerting Fabius Bile, former apothecary of the Emperor's Trojan Legion, to its own existence. It is not known what happened after that, only that the project ended. Delving deeper into the facilities, the explorer team would uncover large incubation tanks with large human male subjects still within them. These subjects were similar to Astartes in physiology, but they were much larger than any Space Marine. The first 2 incubation tanks were cloudy, their subjects deceased and decayed. However, the third tank's subject was still well preserved, the incubation tanks still intact. Autopsies would be performed on the decayed subject, while the team would attempt to revive the third subject. However, from there, we don't really know what happened because an Inquisitor who had hid themselves in the Explorer team was able to report their findings. When the information got out, the Grey Knights were deployed to assure that the technology left on Inculaba did not fall into the wrong hands. But when they arrived, the Explorer team was gone, and so were the subjects that they had found. The world was just as lifeless as what it had been before it was rediscovered. The Grey Knights decided to destroy the world, doing so with cyclonic missiles from space in order to destroy the technology that was there. That is all the information that we have on what was found on Inculaba. This information was secreted away in the possession of the Inquisition and gradually erased from greater imperial records. That is all the information that we have on what was found on Inculaba. This information was secreted away in the possession of the Inquisition and gradually erased from greater imperial records. However, after this information was found, a witch hunt of sorts would be enacted by the Inquisition. Because the goal of the Homo sapiens Novus project was to create more Primarch-like space marines, and evidence had shown that many of the subjects of this project devolved or turned into something no longer human or sane, then if there were any space marine chapters created as a result of the secret project, then they were a threat to the Imperium. Inculaba had been discovered in the 41st millennium, but the Homo sapiens Novus project had begun in M35. Thousands of years had passed since the beginning of the project. This meant that if any Space Marine chapters existed that were created from it, they had existed for a long time. Being that they shared the same strange beginning and cursed fate as the subjects of the secret project, they would be considered part of their own founding. This founding would be called the Cursed Founding, and would be declared to have begun at the same time the project began, in late M35. This would number the founding as the 21st founding. From here, some backtracking would be conducted to figure out which chapters of Astartes were made during that time that could have possibly been the result of this secret project, with obvious flaws being a telltale sign. With this criteria, 7 Space Marine chapters were identified as being part of the Cursed Founding: the Black Dragons, the Blood Gorgons, the Minotaurs, the Flame Falcons, the Firehawks, the Lamenters, and the Sons of Antaeus. Since being categorized as being part of the Cursed Founding, these chapters have been under heavy scrutiny by the Inquisition or have been destroyed due to their flaws that they exhibit. The Homo sapiens Novus project would be deemed a failure, as it was thought to have only created flawed Space Marines in its attempt to create more Primarch-like Space Marines. But despite this backtracking, despite this labeling, despite this scrutiny, everyone was ignoring the truth of the Cursed Founding. The truth of the Cursed Founding was that it wasn't a real founding. It never happened. It was only a theory. As I said earlier, foundings are declared by the High Lords of Terra in a time of need. These declarations are public, formal, and known of by the Space Marine chapters. The Homo sapiens Novus project wasn't a founding. It was a secret project that wasn't discovered until after it was over, nearly 6,000 years after it had begun. Before Inculaba was rediscovered, the idea of the Cursed Founding didn't exist. That being the case, then the chapters said to have been created during the Cursed Founding were in actuality created as part of a different founding, or at least listed as such, instead of being part of their own Cursed Founding. So if the Cursed Founding itself didn't really exist, and the chapters said to have been made during it were in actuality made as part of a different founding, then what founding could they have been made in? The only other named founding to have happened around the same time as this hypothetical Cursed Founding happened was the 13th founding, called the Dark Founding. It was a recorded founding, unlike the Cursed Founding, meaning that it was known about when it was declared. Well, kind of. The thing that made the Dark Founding unique was that it was unknown just how many chapters were made during it or what their gene seed lineages were. The chapters made during this time rarely sent in gene seed tithes, and some of them had their gene seed information barred from access by branches of the Inquisition. It was around this time that really weird chapters started popping up whose gene seed lineages were unknown or questionable. An example would be the Exorcists, who were a very strange chapter said to have been created during the Dark Founding. It's rather obvious by the numbers of the foundings, but despite there having had to have been 8 foundings between the 13th founding and the 21st founding, both were said to happen around the late 35th to early 36th millennium. Basically, they happened at the same time. So it is more than likely that many, if not all, of the chapters listed as part of the Cursed Founding were actually made during this mysterious Dark Founding. Something that could be generally said about the chapters created around the 35th millennium is that their gene seed lineages were difficult to decipher. The 35th millennium was a period of great political strife in the Imperium of Man. The Nova Terra Interregnum happened, in which the Imperium divided in civil war over the authority of the High Lords of Terra. The Moria Schism divided the Mechanicus, and new Xenos threats emerged from the Ghoul Stars. The chapters created during this time had very little information released about them, and their gene seed lineages were closely guarded secrets by many. If we were to only look at the chapters listed as having been created in the Dark Founding, we have the Exorcists, whose gene seed was listed as unknown and is sometimes said to be of Imperial Fist lineage, despite no actual evidence of this. We have the Death Specters, who are said to be descended from the Raven Guard, but have the unique non-Raven Guard characteristic of having blood-red eyes. Then we have the Crimson Sabers, who didn't know which Primarch they descended from, but would later become renegades known as the Crimson Slaughter. Researching further, other chapters were listed as having been created during the early 35th to late 36th millennium, such as the Angels of Fire, of which almost nothing is known, including their gene seed lineage, the Celebrants chapter, of which nothing is known, including gene seed lineage, and the Relictors chapters, who are renegades that used to be called the Fireclaws. This chapter was actually made through the use of two gene seed lineages, the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels, making their lineage chimeric. Also created during the 35th millennium were such chapters as the Astro Claws, whose gene seed lineage is unknown and who would eventually become the Red Corsairs, and the Red Scorpions, whose gene seed lineage is unknown simply because it's so basic that it doesn't have any markers that would indicate being descended from any of the Primarchs. Rampant gene seed manipulation, experimentation, and combination had begun in the 35th millennium, during which the Dark Founding occurred, that produced many chapters, most of which were unlisted, even before the so-called Cursed Founding. Being that the Cursed Founding was not a real founding, but was a secret project, who is to say that the chapters listed as part of the Cursed Founding weren't actually created as part of the Dark Founding? And what is the criteria that distinguishes a chapter as a result of the Homo sapiens Novus project? That is something we will explore in the next video in this series. Thank you all for watching. I'm very excited about this series. The Cursed Founding is something that I'm really passionate about. It's my favorite Space Marine founding just because it's so mysterious, you know, and there's so much that could be speculated about it. So in this second video, I will be going a little bit deeper into the Cursed Founding lore, trying to figure out what was really happening on Inculaba, and then after that I will be going over each of the 7 chapters said to have been created during the Cursed Founding to determine whether or not they were actually a product of the Homo sapiens Novus project, or if they were part of the Dark Founding and just unlisted. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and if you're eager for the other videos, and please share this video with hobby friends as it helps the channel grow. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.